Welcome back to Definitely Not Definitive. I'm Ken.
And I'm Bethany.
And we're just a couple of cookie crazy kids in love that love reacting to some Dark Souls.
Yeah, we do.
So today we're checking out The Legend of Artorias, the Abyss Walker. We had started off with his original Prepare to Cry series, and then we moved on to the remastered one based on suggestions down below in the comments, so thank you so much. We can go back to the original one after this, but we heard that the remastered one, we didn't have to necessarily do them in order. So we could go ahead to the remastered one, and maybe it might give us a better understanding of Dark Souls. So
okay.
if you want all our reactions to Dark Souls and the Prepare to Cry series, check out the description of this video. We got a playlist there for you, as well as a link to our Patreon. You can get early free access to videos like this. And yeah, are you ready?
I'm ready.
In Gwyn's Age of Fire, there were 4 knights who distinguished themselves above all others. First, there was Hawkeye Goth, who fought in the First War against the dragons. He exulted in the thrill of the hunt, plucking dragons out of the sky with his enormous greatbow.
Damn!
Soon, the only dragons left were in his memories, which he revisited endlessly. Fighting on the ground was Ornstein, the dragon slayer. He wielded a long, lightning cross spear that could be stamped deep into a stone dragon's hide. Its curious design went on to remind many of an exiled god of war, though none of them dared to speak his name. And then there was Kiran, whose talents differed considerably from the previous 2. A stealthy assassin, she would have been no match for dragons, and so she must have killed for Gwyn in the Age of Fire to follow. She dazzled her foes with streaks of gold in the night, and then stung with the vicious poison of her silver tracer. But in the Age of Man to come, none were as well equipped as the great knight Artorias. For nothing, not dragons, nor disunity, nor even his enemies, frightened Gwyn like the dark. The dark soul of man filled the Lord of Light with fear, for one day, Gwyn knew, the fire would fade, and humanity would inherit the world. His world. So while he still had time and power, Gwyn began to rig the world in his favor. Mankind had stood amongst those who set out to slay the ancient dragons, and, as if in thanks, Gwyn bestowed upon pygmies and men the Ringed City, an enormous, gilded city located at World's End. The walls were as tall as mountains, and above them soared Medir, an immortal archdragon that was raised by the gods. Below slumbered Gwyn's youngest daughter, the Princess Filianor, a woman of enormous faith and power who Gwyn gave up to protect the pygmies until the very end of the world. And at first glance, you might think these acts benevolent, you might think they were kind, but in the end, it was just a trick of the light. The walls were not for protection. The dragon had an eternal duty to battle the dark, and Gwyn's daughter, Filianor, would never see her father again. The purpose of the Ringed City was not to protect the holders of the original Dark Soul, it was to imprison them, like a ring of fire that encircles the darkness of humanity. And man was, in fact, branded with this very seal, the Dark Sign. And despite clear evidence of their heroism in the war against the dragons, their Dark Knights never were lauded for their service. So it's no wonder, then, that in all of the spellcraft and the hexes that stem from humanity, one thing remains constant. It craves a free will of its own, and it writhes against its shackles. Perhaps the first example of this was the Mad King. He was pygmy royalty, and he rebelled against the light. We have no idea what crimes he committed, but they must have been terrible, for he was put to death by Shira, a knight of Filianor. Only the Mad King would not die, and Shira, with the Mad King impossibly entwined around her spear, had no choice but to hold him quietly in a dark room until the end of time. There were, of course, other human cities outside of the Ringed City. One such example was the Dark City of New Londo, which was governed by 4 human kings and protected by Knights of the Dark Blade. The kings were renowned for their foresight, and they even had fragments of Gwyn's very own soul bestowed upon them, so that they could better govern their people. Of course, this too was another trick of the light, for what lies at the top of New Londo but Filing Shrine, a place of undead sacrifice to Gwyn's Age of Fire. So no human city was permitted to flourish without a clear benefit to the Age of Fire. And there was no better example of this than another human city called Oolacile, which was the golden land of light sorceries. Light, it turns out, can be manipulated to foster illusions. It can hide your intentions, it can even mess with the fabric of time. And spells of this nature would be of great value to the gods in the coming years, so Oolacile flourished, an exemplary city for Gwyn's pantheon, because it was proof that humanity could be taught to serve their interests. And so it was that a group of missionaries from Oolacile embarked upon the Ringed City, perhaps to preach and reinforce the power of the light in this dark city. One of these missionaries was called Half-Light, and he was a talented individual who was wielding the powerful artifacts of his homeland. He would go on to earn the favor of Filianor, and he would even earn the legendary dragon weapon of Medir. So it was no surprise that Half-Light elected to stay behind, becoming the last recorded spear of the church. And just as Half-Light visited the Ringed City and even stayed behind, the reverse was also true of a certain pygmy from the Ringed City. This pygmy's name was Manus. And while we know nothing about the nature of his visit to Oolacile, we do know one thing: he died there, and the body of primeval man, of Manus, was put to rest far, far beneath the city itself, out of the light and out of mind. We don't know much about Manus, and a lot is left to the imagination. What we do know is that he was a pygmy far from home. He was a part of a race that Gwyn was doing everything in his power to suppress. And when you think on Manus's fate, it's kind of hard to imagine that Gwyn didn't have a hand in it, especially since Gwyn had an order of assassins, the Lord's Blades, in his employ. The leader of the Lord's Blades was Kidan, the Hornet. It stated that she laid waste to Gwyn's enemies. And of course, there's no proof that the Lord's Blades actually killed Manus, but you could also argue that that's rather the point of assassins, isn't it? Whatever the case, the tide was turning. Mankind was struggling against the world order, and even New Londo, which was once a haven for undead, had turned into a hideous spawning ground for the Abyss and its dark wraiths. At the heart of this uprising was a serpent named Karth, who swayed the Four Kings and taught its undead knights how to pillage back their humanity. Some descriptions even say the dark wraiths became the most human of all. But to others,
the dark wraiths are the enemies of man and any living thing that has a soul.
So as the age of man crept ever closer, yet another knight of Gwyn appeared, perfectly equipped to face it, the great Knight Artorias. With a greatsword weighted to strike harder against servants of the dark, a great wolf who defined their fighting style.
Sweet.
In the covenant with the beasts of the Abyss, Knight Artorias and Sif defiantly faced the worst of mankind. Yet, in the end, the terror that was the Dark Wraiths could only be stifled with the sacrifice of their entire city. Such was the power of their Four Kings and the resilience of their Abyss. Luckily for Gwyn, such a safety measure had been put in place years ago, and so the sealers of New Londo watched stoically as water rushed into the city and thousands of innocents died by their hand.
The entire city was sacrificed to contain them, for that is how great a threat they were.
But while Gwyn did manage to put the New Londo threat on hold, no one was prepared for the outbreak in Oolacile. I imagine when they figured out that a primeval human was buried beneath their very city, the temptation must have been too great to resist.
Believe it or not, Oolacile has brought the Abyss upon itself, fooled by that toothy serpent. They upturned the grave of primeval man and incited his ornery wrath. What could they have been thinking?
Like the mad pygmy king before him, Manus rejected death, and he was as far from peace as could be. The raw emotion of humanity that we mentioned earlier billowed outwards, corrupting the townsfolk of Oolacile, and Manus became the father of an unstoppable dark abyss. Curiously, though, it's almost as if he was searching for something, using his power to reach across time and space until he found it. Instead, he found Dusk, Princess of Ulasil.
I still think on that creature from the abyss that preyed upon me. My faculties were far from lucid, but I quite clearly sensed certain emotions. A wrenching nostalgia, a lost joy, an object of obsession, and a sincere hope to reclaim it. Could these thoughts belong to the beast from the abyss? But if that were true, then perhaps it is no beast after all.
The object of his obsession was a pendant, and with it in our possession, we're pulled back to a time where all appears lost.
Well, look at this one. From what faraway age hast thou come? Thy scent is very human indeed, but not intolerable. I am Elizabeth, guardian of this sanctuary. Thou shalt see further on, an abyss was begat of the ancient beast, and threatens to swallow the whole of Ulasil.
The city is lost, the abyss is spreading, and mankind has succumbed to the worst parts of their nature. When Gwyn heard of Manus and his abyss, Artorias must have been the first one sent to deal with the threat. He was, after all, the best equipped, but fighting dark wraiths is considerably different to the power of primeval man. So Artorias was bested and was forced to retreat. Beset by the abyss, the final act of Artorias was to protect his companion. He shielded Sif with the divine power of his great shield. After all, his arm was broken, and he could no longer bear the burden. Then, Artorias himself was overcome.
All of you, forgive me, for I have availed you nothing.
Knight Artorias came to stop this, but such a hero has nary a murmur of dark. Without doubt he will be swallowed by the abyss, overcome by its utter blackness. Indeed, the abyss may be unstoppable.
All was lost, and yet strangely, soon after the spread of the abyss was actually halted, and Princess Dusk of Ulasil miraculously wandered out of the abyss. Artorias' name henceforth passed into legend, the knight who gave his life to disperse the abyss to rescue the Princess of Ulasil. This is a lie, of course. In reality, it is we who rescued the princess, and we fulfilled the legacy of Artorias.
This may strike thine ear as somewhat peculiar, but long ago, in my homeland of Ulasil, I was beset by a creature from the abyss. I would have perished then, were it not for the great knight Artorias. In truth, I saw little of what transpired, for mine senses were already fled, but even still, there was something about Artorias, a certain balance of the humors that quite perfectly fits your semblance. Heavens, could it be that?
With this, Manus' suffering has ended. But Manus wasn't the only corruption of the abyss that we killed in Ulasil. There was also Artorias. The legend of Artorias is a lie. He did not vanquish the father of the abyss. He did not eliminate the dark wraiths of New Londo. The abyss is unstoppable, and yet, eons later, the legend of Artorias would inspire a legion of Abyss Watchers who continue to rage against the dying of the light. Yes, the abyss is unstoppable, but they fight nonetheless. Even in this state, notice that Artorias continues to seek out and kill corruptions of humanity. He's still in there somewhere, but his legend can only live on with his death. Only his fellow knights knew the truth, but they would take his soul and his secret to the grave. And while Artorias' soul was corrupted by the worst of humanity, it was the best of humanity that redeemed it. And the hero of Ulasil would disappear without a trace, almost as if he didn't belong. For in reality, he didn't. And eons later, deep within an enchanted wood, behind 2 locked doors and a troop of forest protectors, an ancient cat speaks the truth.
The legend of Artorias art none but a fabrication. Traversing the dark, 'tis but a fairy tale.
Alvina is keen to downplay the legend of Artorias because heroes and bandits have begun seeking out his grave. They would desecrate his legacy for the secret of abyss walking, and they may do harm to Sif, who, in fact, Alvina helped you rescue back when the world was still young. Imagine what Sif is feeling when you cross paths again years later. You're duty-bound to seek the abyss, and Sif is duty-bound to stop you. One of you will have to die, because Sif cannot give you the Covenant of Artorias willingly. Maybe, in death, he can find his friend Artorias again. Before I go, I just want to say a couple more things. Firstly, this video was made far, far better by the contributions of a guy called the Parry God, who recorded footage for me this time. It allowed me to sort of focus more on the script and the edit. He's responsible for those fantastic slow motion shots, which I didn't know how to do, but they fit really, really well with the pacing of the video. So do me a favor and please go watch his cinematic short film on Dark Souls 3 because it's inspiring stuff, he's just getting his channel started, and his upcoming work is really well worth your subscription in my opinion. And this is an appropriate video to shout out somebody else's channel in because all those years ago, this video, Prepare to Cry, Artorias, this was the story I decided to tell for the first time, and this is the video that got my channel started, so being able to work on this again after everything I've learned was really special for me, and I really appreciate that you watched it all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.
Wow, as these videos go on, like when they first start off, I'm always wondering, like, Prepare to Cry. It's like, I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, it's probably gonna be a good story, but I don't think it's gonna be like, that heartfelt. And then at the end there, I don't know if it's the music and everything and just the way it's told. Yeah, it's very touching, very sad, and like not in a sort of obvious see it coming kind of way when it's gonna like I said before, like I never see it coming how it's gonna wrap up and how it's gonna affect me. But this one did.
Prepare to Cry, I didn't really know like if that was referencing to something or if it was literally telling me to prepare to cry. So I don't think I came in with any necessary expectations, but as we got about halfway through the Artorias journey, and it was like, oh, that legend stuff, well, that's not true and that didn't really happen. All I could think in the back of my mind was, but he still protected his puppy, right? Like that part was true, right?
Of course.
And so like this is just kind of like playing on a loop in the back of my brain. So then when we get to the actual part about the dog protecting the grave, like, man, I was gonna lose it. Like I was tearing up and like you feel like the thing in your throat start to go. And I was like, well, I guess it was literal. Now I know.
Yeah, and I mean, just the fact that shot there at the end with the dog and like jumping on him and then sniffing him, like not attacking right away, and just sort of like the howl and the reluctance of needing to defend the grave because that's his job and he's going to defend Artorias. Yeah, like not wanting to fight out of malice or hate or anything like that, but just like out of duty and out of protecting. And it just, it hit me. One other thing that stuck out to me in this is just sort of like, I don't know, the necessity for legend and the part that legends can play. And, like the inspiration that Artorias' story gave to other people to fight the abyss. And the fact that even though it was like based on a lie, it still inspired people to do good. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's just something that stuck out to me.
Based on a lie, but kind of based on what we'd want the story to be.
Yeah.
I mean, because he did still fight against the darkness.
Yep.
And in some ways made that ultimate sacrifice. It was, no, he didn't die, but he was absorbed by the darkness, which in some ways is kind of like a worse outcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite the fairy tale ending. So we repackage it, we market it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think he's still very much heroic in my eyes, even without the fairy tale ending.
If you want all of our Dark Souls reactions, go ahead and check out the description of this video. We got a playlist there for you. Thanks so much for checking out our reaction for Dark Souls Prepare to Cry, The Legend of the Abyss Walker Artorias, but just keep in mind
that our reaction is definitely not definitive.